there were a group of women who got together and founded NOW, and Betty Friedan was sort of the idea person, and Catherine was both ideas and organization, because Betty Friedan was chaotic. I ran across her at a conference a few years ago, and she was so disorganized that I stayed with her and helped her get around. She was, but I got interested in the women's movement partly because of Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, that had a powerful influence on me. Because I was married to a minister, Paul, and I had all these expectations about what Protestant ministers' wives were supposed to do. And I was restless. I think I had some smarts, and I'd been in school, and I really wanted to do something more. So when I read Betty Friedan's book, she sort of just opened the door and said, hey, I know how you feel. Go ahead and do some things for yourself. Otherwise, you were supposed to focus on your husband and your children. That wasn't all bad for a lot of women, but for me, I wanted to do something. I had 2 kids, too. And how old were they when I went back to work? The ministers' wives weren't supposed to work, so that was a trauma. When I first went back to work, the bishop's wife told me, if you don't quit what you're doing, your husband will go back to Podunk Center. I can't believe that. My husband was so irritated, he wrote a letter to the bishop and said, if you feel this way too, you can have my credentials, which was a pretty gutsy thing to do. Anyway, supposedly she was teasing, so we got...
Tell me more about this book, The Feminine Mystique. How did it affect you? Where were you at mentally? And what ideas did it introduce? Just that you could have a life?
Yeah, I remember we had a little cottage in Mount Morris outside of Wautoma, and I was sitting watching my kids play in the sand on this little lake, and I read these things about Betty Friedan saying, women have a lot of potential and a lot of abilities. Yes, you may have a family, but you may want to do more than this. And in a way, she made it more acceptable. She put into words, I think, a lot of what some women were thinking. I want to do more than just have an identity from my husband. You know, we were always Mrs. Kenneth Engelman. I was never Marge, or, you know, I was always seen as Ken's spouse. So wherever we went, I got recognition through him, but not because of who I was. It was a dramatic shift.
On campus, did you, obviously this was social transition. You had old paradigm people and new paradigm. How was it on campus with the faculty and the staff people?
Oh, well, I can tell you these stories about when I got... Widener promoted me in a lot of ways. He brought me on to the Chancellor's Council early on because the women were saying, hey, we need some women's representation on this council. So that was kind of a privileged place, although I didn't feel I had a lot of influence. And there were all these, do you remember Warner Prangy?
Yes.
I mean, he'd say things to me like, Marge, I can just see you as an attractive broad, but I don't see you as an administrator. I mean, that was, he was probably just more outspoken than most people.
He wasn't saying it in jest?
No, he was not. Of course, Warner Prangy grew up under, he was one of the brown shirts in Hitler's army, if you didn't know that. Yeah, he never talked about that. Well, that was the word. I assume it's true. He came from Germany. He was very loyal to Widener and to the campus.
How did he get connected, you know?
You know, I don't know. He and Widener were, Widener respected him, and in the early days they were trying to do this innovative campus thing, so Werner got charged with doing the all the electronic work, what was considered advanced work then. You know, you could project from the classroom, and you had all this equipment in the classroom. So Werner, that was sort of Werner's empire. And they also got the campus connected to the state radio network, because it was called WPNE. We used to call it Warner Prangy's New Empire. Well, and then there were people like, there were other deans that I worked with. And one of those deans said to me, Paul, you know, I just don't know how to treat you. I'll just treat you like I treat my wife. You know, it was like they just didn't see women in taking responsibility and being in administrative roles, because they were so used to having us as secretaries or, you know, in lower positions. So some of that is in this paper. I really dealt with a lot of crap. And of course you weren't supposed to cry. And at that stage in my life, I cried pretty easily. So when I get frustrated, I just go to the bathroom and sit and cry, so I didn't cry in front of anybody. Anyway, that was part of the... I used to say I felt like I walked a tightrope between being who I was as a woman with a lot of feelings and emotion, and still wanting to be an administrator and be respected in that role. So I always felt I was wobbling back and forth.
Check here. We're doing okay.
Warner Printing, was he a tall man?
Yeah, sort of tall and robust. Good-looking guy.
Of the same age as Ed Waiter?
He might have been a little bit, yeah, probably about the same age. At one point he was a vice chancellor, but then he took on the chancellor's role briefly. I don't remember what that was all about, but there were times when the administrators shifted roles a little bit, but it never...
What do you understand happened when campus opened in '69 and in '70, a number of the deans left and they created what they call the super dean? And were you paying attention to
I remember that a number of people left, and I think it was conflict with Widener, but I don't have an inside track on that. I know Ray Vlasen left because I think Widener felt he wasn't doing what he wanted him to do.
Which was what?
He was vice chancellor for development and outreach, and I think he was very popular in the community, and that may have been a threat to Widener, because Widener was in a way, but not in the same way that Vlasen was. So, you know, there were a lot of subtle things going on, I think, that... And let's see, who else left?
Well, as Fred Sargent.
Yeah.
Did you know him at all?
Yeah, but I didn't know him well. I don't know why he left, but I know there were a number of people who left.
Oh, and then Fonterra.
Yeah, but Fonterra was a part of forming the LES program. Ia Corner, do you remember Ia Corner?
The name, I never...
Yeah, Ia was... his background was in psychotherapy and counseling, I think, and he was the key person to develop the LES program. And he couldn't, I think he was a very good counselor, but he couldn't get organized to develop that program and get it on paper. So there were these young bucks like, who's the guy you just mentioned?
Fonterra.
Yeah, Fonterra, Swinnerton. There were about 3 or 4 young men, Crandall, who tried to help him put that program together. Eventually, Widener took Ia out of that position, and I'm not sure who played the key role in developing LES then. The Hartleys, do you remember the Hartleys?
Oh, the name, yes. I think I actually met them. But...
There were 2. Jean Hartley and Ruth. They were retired from some other place and came here to help this university get started. And Ruth was known as a specialist in child development, especially related to play. And she had developed a child development program and was very negative, Paul, about us developing a child care center. So,
where is that?
Well, I think she thought it would detract from what she was doing. And I'm not a real, well, I'm assertive, but I tend to be kind. And she kept bugging me about how we shouldn't be doing that. And one day I ran into her and she was giving me this line, and I said to her, Ruth Hartley, you get off my back. We are going to have a child care center, and I don't give a damn what you think. And you know, she never bugged me after that. I think she needed me to just push back and say, get off of it. Gene was, what was his specialty? I guess it was counseling, and because I know he helped Ken with his dissertation. But they stayed around for quite a while. And then I think as they got older and older, they just... So there were some of those older people who came in. Sargent was older, too. Who else?
Were these people of any source or involved in controversy in the community? Were they accepted? Or?
No, I don't think they were negative. I'm not sure how well the community knew those people.
You spent more time in the community than all these people coming in.
Yeah,
so,
I did a lot of speaking, Paul. I've been going through my speech files. It's incredible. I was talking both about going back to school, encouraging people to come, and then also the women's movement. There's a lot of interest in what was going on in the women's movement. And
because what they're agitating?
Yeah, and you know, I don't know what was said behind my back, but I can remember going to men's clubs to talk about the women's movement, and all the questions I got, traditional, you know, negative.
Well, tell me, well, this is interesting now. What reaction would you get? What would you make sure you mentioned to you know,
well,
jab them a little bit?
I would just try to tell them what it meant for women to be able to be a little freer and to do some of the things they wanted to do. And of course they had all the questions about the bra burners, and they saw the feminist movement as radical. And I would say, I'm a feminist, but I don't consider myself radical. I just care about women and what's happening to them. So I'm trying to remember some of the comments I'd get. I'm not sure I can remember from speaking, but it was clear in a lot of groups that they were listening, but they weren't with me. But I saw it as a way to try to open up people's minds a little. I think the university had quite an impact on helping change attitudes toward women in the Green Bay area. I don't know.